So in part one of this bookmaking process, I selected the page paper and cover material, cut and folded the pages into signatures, and made a cover page out of 4 colors of paper. Now it's time to bind the book. For this project, I've selected single needle coptic binding. Coptic binding works well for books with multiple signatures, like this one. In one of my practice books, I tried another technique, French link stitch binding, but I felt the links were too bulky for such a thin book. The next step in preparing the signatures is punching the holes along the fold to pull the binding thread through. I measured where I wanted to place each hole, made a note of it on a practice book, and marked it with a pencil. I'm using a bookbinding punch guide, where each hole is spaced 1/4 inch apart, and the center valley acts like a cradle to keep the fold in line with the guide. I'm using an awl to punch the holes in each signature. After I punch the holes in all of the signatures, I move on to the cover. Initially, I was going to score and fold the Yupo to wrap it around the signatures. Since I switched techniques to coptic binding, my first plan for the cover also had to change. With coptic binding, I needed separate cover pieces as the signatures are sandwiched in between the unattached covers, and then the stitching holds them all together along the spine. Let's cut up some Yupo. I'm adding 1/4 inch to the width of the cover to make sure the signature pages don't extend beyond the cover. When all the individual covers are cut, then I need to punch holes in the Yupo that line up with the holes in the signatures. I use one of the signatures as a guide for the cover holes and mark their position 1/4 inch in from the spine edge of the cover. While the durability of Yupo was one of the reasons I chose it, that durability makes it difficult to get a clean hole using an awl. Instead, I'm using a Japanese push drill with a 1mm bit to make the holes in the cover. After I punch the holes in the first cover, it's easy to use it as a template to mark the rest of the covers I've cut. I've got the covers and signatures ready, and now I can start stitching. Up to this point, I've been experimenting with the materials and tools I use to make this book. But I won't be experimenting with my thread choice, waxed linen. The linen is strong and durable, and the wax helps the thread glide more easily through the holes and keeps it from fraying. I'm measuring how much thread I need by counting out 7 lengths, the number of signatures plus both covers. I recommend using at least this amount of thread the first couple of books you bind, so you don't worry about running out. As I've bound more of these books, I'm making 12 total for this edition, I've found I have a length and a half of thread left over at the end. So with other copies, I shortened the amount of thread I use to 6 lengths, which saves a little waste. Another non-negotiable tool for coptic binding particularly is a curved needle. I have straight bookbinding needles, but their length can make this kind of stitching very difficult. I got my curved one from a set of furniture upholstery needles. Once the needle is threaded, I can start. I used a tutorial to learn how to do single needle coptic binding. The video was super helpful and gives a really detailed step-by-step guide through the process. I definitely recommend giving it a watch if you're considering trying out coptic binding for a project. I'll leave the details below. Even with a solid tutorial to guide me, I still had some issues. One of the first problems was my selection of Yupo for the cover. It is durable, however, it is also very flexible and didn't perform the way a cover made out of bookboard would. I had to place my fingers over the hole as I pulled the thread through to keep the Yupo from warping. Usually when you're pulling thread through a stitch, it's possible to use the strength of the bookboard cover to tighten a thread loop after the stitches have been loosely sewn in. With Yupo, I had to tighten each stage of a stitch's loop separately, because if I pulled it hard to tighten everything at the end, that could enlarge or tear the hole. I also had to be careful with the 24-pound paper signatures. 4 of my signatures only had 2 sheets thickness. This made it easy to punch holes in them with an awl, while also making it easy to over-widen the holes when tightening stitches, or to punch through the paper in a place I didn't mean to if I accidentally missed the original hole. Most of the way I dealt with these delicate materials was slowing down and using a lot of caution with each stitch. But there was something else I didn't account for: getting tired. I was putting in these last stitches after a long day of both binding this book and filming the process. I stopped recording right after this stitch. However, I still wanted to get this book finished. As I hurried through the last 2 holes, I pulled a little too hard on the very last loop and snapped right through the hole in the cover. I was devastated and stopped for the day. The next morning, I pulled myself together and realized I could mend it with a little translucent tape. I cut the tape down and applied it to the inside of the cover. I carefully put in the last stitch, and the tape held it together just fine. I tied the finishing double knot and snipped off the tail. The last thread loop covers the split completely, and I can't even see the tape. One last detail I decided to include is a sparkly bookmark. I'm using DMC Light Effects embroidery floss. The coptic binding not only helps the book to lay down flat when open, it provides an easy place to tie a bookmark securely. So here's the finished book. It's really satisfying to see Eckington Seasons complete after the 3 years of writing and editing, then designing and making a physical version of this book. I've learned a great deal and picked up a few new skills that I know will help me in future projects. I'd love to know if you have a project you've been working on for a while. What keeps you going through all the challenges along the way? If you're curious to read Eckington Seasons, I've got a full-color PDF version available to download for free on my website, kategorman.art. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.